I'm Sonya Sepahban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations of all kinds build an inclusive workplace by providing what we call the 3 Ps, the professional, the process, and the technology platform. All of that at an affordable monthly subscription. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Tonya Matthews. She is the Associate Provost for Inclusive Workplace Development and Director of the STEM Learning Innovation Center, or what we call the SILC, at Wayne State University. The fellowship that we will discuss is Tonya's brainchild, and we're excited that she asked us to join the program to provide our expertise, process, and technology towards this great endeavor to build inclusive workplaces while also developing the next generation of D&I professionals. We also have Anushka Sarif, one of our key D&I advisors, joining us from our office. She will be moderating the questions in real time, but you will not really see or hear Anushka. I just wanted to recognize that she will be helping us here. Thank you, Anushka. So before we get started, let's first make sure you're familiar with what you will see on the slides and with the webinar tool, so you can also interact with us. There will be polls to find out about your needs. This is very much of a two-way information session. Whenever you see the Danny sign on the slides, that's a little elephant with a pink background, you will know that a poll is coming up. You should be seeing the results in the chat area. You can also use this chat function to ask any questions. Again, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should be seeing the chat area, and you can type in the section that is shown there with the arrow. We will answer as many questions as possible in real time, but also later on. If we don't get to any questions, please feel free to put them in, and we can always respond to you later on. Also, please note that this section is being recorded, and the recording will be available. So here's the agenda. After a bit of introductions, we will talk about why diversity, equity, or inclusion, or DEI. I know that a lot of people know about that, but we always feel like it's a good thing to sync everyone up and cover that quickly. Then we will talk about why now and why this particular program. We will share about how the process works. It's a proven process, but also, again, tailored to your needs. So we will share about that and what our current plans are. Throughout, we will be asking questions, again, in the polls to understand better about your needs. And then a little bit about next steps. So let's start with the first poll to learn more about you. So if you go to the, you can see that you can interact with the poll. And the poll is asking, what is the size of your organization? The options are under 50 employees, 50 to 100, 100 to 200, to 250, excuse me, 250 to 500, and 500 to 1,000. We are seeing some results coming in. We see right now 20% are in 50 to 100. That just went down to 15%. About a half are 100 to 250, and about maybe 40% or so, 500 to 1,000. Okay, in a moment there, I think we're going to close it. And with that, I would like to hand off to Tonya to tell us a little bit and introduce us to the Wayne State University STEM Innovation Learning Center.
Thank you, Sonya, and thank you everyone for joining us. I want to acknowledge the nod of thinking of part of this program as my brainchild, but you know, it takes a village, right? So I started surfacing this thing as an embryo. Now it's almost a toddler, and I do have Sonya and her team and the folks at Wayne State University who are also supporting this program. Just not wanting to assume that folks know about Wayne State University or actually the STEM Innovation Learning Center that recently opened up. Wayne State University, we are known as Michigan's most diverse public university, so we are proud of that in and of itself, but it's one of the reasons why we want to be engaged with projects like this. We are affiliated with more than 100 institutions worldwide. We do take partnerships very, very seriously, especially when tackling big problems like DEI. We are classified as an R1 university. For those who follow that, there are just over 130 Research One universities in the country. Wayne State is one of those, and we are one of less than 40 that are actually embedded inside urban communities. And so part of this is being proud of that, but also taking advantage of our environment and the responsibility and bringing learning and deep thought to conversations like the one that we are about to share with you that we've begun with OurOffice. The STEM Innovation Learning Center was a response to the growing interest in STEM career fields, STEM career paths, or simply being able to work with and through STEM-enabled companies. And so we saw a lot of enrollment and interest in that space. We actually opened up the building in fall 2020. No, COVID did not ruin everything. So we did actually manage to complete that project. It is a 7-story plus basement, phenomenal teaching and learning space with modern bells and whistles, flexible classrooms, a makerspace, AR, VR space. But part of the culture of the STEM Innovation Learning Center is a facility. It's going to be one of the hubs for Wayne State University's STEM and STEM-based equity initiatives, such as the conversation we're having here today. So next slide. So here's where Sonya and I are going to also be doing a handoff. So, thought leaders attract thought leaders. So it's been great to be inside this conversation. One of the things that Wayne State University takes very seriously is this conversation around social mobility and being a public school. And one of the ways we do that is enabling STEM careers, STEM professionals, and leaders in those spaces, as it has become a solid pathway to a very stable future of work. We have been recognized in various categories. We are a member of the National Diversity Council, and I want to give a shout out to my colleagues over at the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. So we have been doing this work in various ways, and they have been very helpful in helping us to think through on the STEM side, how we can broaden the way that we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in all spaces. Sonya.
Wow, well, Tonya, that's amazing. Now I think everybody in the audience can see why we were so excited when you connected with us, and we are, so looking forward to this program with you. We are also lucky at OurOffice to have been featured by, some really key players like Deloitte and Mercer as leading in this DEI space and the things that we do. You can see some of our activities here with blogs, roundtables, ebooks, newsletters, and much more. So we invite you to go to our website at OurOffice.io. Again, that's .io, not .com, to join any of these activities and really be part of this conversation. What we do at OurOffice is really our main offering, which is D&I as a service. And this means that we have a turnkey solution, which includes everything you need for building an inclusive workplace culture, as detailed here. It starts, of course, with assessments. It includes data and technology, all of it led by a dedicated DEI manager to guide and support you through the whole process. We'll talk more about which aspects of this are included in the fellowship and what it means specifically to you. But I really just wanted here to make a point that this is what we're all about. Again, what we talk about is the 3 Ps, providing the professional. You see the smiley face here of a typical DEI manager, our process that we will share more about with you, and then the platform. So now let's go to the next part of the agenda, which is really the heart of the matter. Again, why DEI, why now, and why this program? To talk about why DEI, there's a lot of data about why diversity, equity, and inclusion really makes business sense. But here are some top business kind of outcomes that we have been found to be linked with having a diverse and inclusive culture. The reason we highlight these is because we find that no matter what kind of an organization you are, regardless of your industry or size, you can still have one or more of these priorities that are linked with the DEI. So there's clearly a business case in terms of the return on every dollar you spend. More likely to be innovative and agile if you have a diverse and inclusive culture, being more likely to achieve better outcomes. And then this last one is what we're all after, right? With 50% of the workforce already being millennials and Gen Zers and heading towards 75% of the workforce by 2025. This is really important. You are 3 times as more likely to retain millennials for 5 years or more if you have a diverse and inclusive workplace that they can look forward to. So let's learn a little bit about what your business priorities are. And think of it in the next 12 months. Again, here is a poll that will be coming up as Anushka puts it up. What are your business priorities? And your choices here are, successful back to work with the new normal, attracting and retaining talent, expanding markets into new regions, innovating and building new products, margin expansion, operational efficiency, improving valuation and attracting new investors, increasing employee engagement and productivity. And there may be others, or you may not exactly know which one of these to choose, but please, if you can, choose one of these so we can kind of get a little better appreciation for what some of the key drivers are for yourselves. Wow, we can see some of the results coming in. And Tonya, as we are looking at these results coming in, would you like to go on to why now?
Sure. I think one of the things that's becoming very helpful and very clear is we're at one of those rare moments where the business proposition for DEI and the community demand for DEI are actually meeting in the middle, right? Whether we're a B2B or a B2C type business, it's always nice when the customer actually wants what's good for you. And one of the things that I noticed about sort of the poll is that many of the things we wanted before the pandemic, before the awakenings this summer, retaining talent, being able to innovate, are exactly the things we want now, and we're going to want to maintain going forward. So for all that has changed, a lot of our fundamental business goals remain in place. And what we've been given is a moment to reflect on some of those things. And the difference between a moment and an opportunity is simply what you do with it, right? So we've had sort of the pandemic come, some say reveal, some say give us focus on what's really important to you in terms of what you think about work environments, how you like to be included. Of course, we've had social uprisings and really critical conversations about not just the state of the country, but the state of our own businesses, the state of our own communities inside of businesses. And so we are in a moment where we can think about, so this is a good time. We can have these conversations. We are having these conversations, and we're expected to have these conversations. And so while I would argue there's always time for DEI, I do think that now is a particularly opportune moment that we should not and cannot ignore. Next slide, please. So what's with the idea of creating sort of a fellowship around it, diversity, equity, and inclusion fellowship? As we were thinking about this over the last several months, there were sort of 3 main problems or issues or ideas that came up. The first was around a DEI disconnect, right? Many companies, many businesses, many teams have made sincere efforts to work on diversity, and by whatever standards, they are not working, right? Maybe your culture survey is coming back just the same, or the CFO is still asking about the return on investment for that workshop you did, or whatever it is. And part of that was the idea of diversity without thinking through inclusion, right? The processes, the networks, what we need to do. And then we found that inclusion without equity is simply not sustainable, right? If we can't figure out how to balance all of those things, and that gets into retention and recruitment of talent, which many of you said was one of our issues. And the third part of that is that corporate cultures themselves are as unique as the customers and employees that they serve. And in this space, I'm particularly drawn to the STEM sector, right? STEM businesses, STEM-enabled businesses, because we are technical, logical, fact-based people. We like spreadsheets. Yes, we do, even when we're creating products for the customer. And so thinking about strategies for infusing and institutionalizing and sustaining the work of DEI inside that culture became a real sort of challenge for me to think through. The second thing is that I'm at a university, we do workforce development, we have undergraduates, graduates. Wayne State has a community near 30,000. And what we realize is that training in diversity, equity, and inclusion is absent from our traditional academic and career training for STEM and technical professionals. Many of our students do take opportunities to engage in these conversations. But let's say we've got a future engineer or a future computer scientist who is working on their undergraduate or graduate degree here. And what they intend to do is found their own company or lead a company or be a division manager at a company. DEI is a new core competency. And so thinking about how do we prepare those students, not just to do the technical parts of their work, but to lead inside organizations with a lens that supports, if not pushes forward, DEI inside the companies. And last but not least, a straight acknowledgement to everyone who's actually in this webinar and who will watch it after the fact, which is that companies are increasingly prioritizing this conversation. We are indeed talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means there are folks who are getting promoted into newly created DEI roles. There's DEI expectations for all divisions and all departments, and someone's a leader or a group lead or having these conversations. And while these roles and these initiatives are being prioritized, the training is not keeping up with that demand. For someone who is already trained, already in the space, they're known as a great team player, and all of a sudden, now they're the diversity manager for their division or their department. Very excited to be there, but are looking for tools that are specific to their division, their company culture, and how can we measure and get those things done. So those three questions were coming up, and they actually were the source of sort of creating this collaboration with our office in terms of thinking about how to tackle and address these three issues that were colliding. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sonya.
Thank you, Tonya. Well said. So now we're going to actually talk about how the process works. Before we do that, I do want to specifically highlight the results of the poll in case you missed it, in terms of the question of what are some of the reasons that you are focused, perhaps, or the challenges that you are looking forward to. So what came up is, I think, 22% in attracting and retaining talent, 33% innovating and building new products, and another 22% increasing employee engagement and productivity. So those are the top three. The other two that came up was expanding markets and also margin expansion and operational efficiency. So those are all really great reasons to be thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so how does the process actually work? Here we're going to give you a high-level summary, and then, of course, happy to answer questions as we go forward. So we call this process the ACT process. Again, it's a proven process, really shows results, and what it is made up of, or what this acronym ACT stands for, is align, connect, and transform. And as you see, these key elements that are shown in this graphic are really responsive to some of the challenges that we talked about. And we'll talk about how specifically in a little bit. But the first piece of this is align. It takes about 2 to 3 months. It's focused on the elements that you see there. It's focused on assessing, listening, and planning. And then the second step, connect, is focused on educating, communicating, and engaging. Again, another 2 to 3 months. So these two elements, these two phases together, are expected to take about 6 months. And I want to highlight that this is what really the core of the DEI fellowship program is that we're talking about. There is a third phase, or the third step, that is referred to as transform. It's the T in ACT. And that's an ongoing process. It's about continuing to measure, continuing to track, continuing to adjust and make progress. And certainly those are available to programs, as a continuation of the program for those that sign up for and decide to proceed with the fellowship program. So those are also available as we go forward. Now, before we go into too much more detail about Align and Connect, which is the heart of the fellowship program, let's talk about the specific challenges that are generally experienced and see how the process then addresses them, as I said earlier, because we designed the process to really be responsive. So this is really the startling piece of data that puts the challenge in perspective, right? This is BCG data. They talked to over 16,000 people and found that over 97% of their organizations reportedly had DEI efforts ongoing, but only 25% were actually successful in terms of benefit to the targeted populations. Now, this is very disappointing. So there is a lot of effort. It's not for lack of effort. It's just that people don't get outcomes because of the challenges that we will talk about here in a moment. But it is the reality. So why is that? Here are the key challenges. Based on our own experiences with customers over the last few years and research data, really by many organizations, there are three common challenges that organizations face when they start focusing on DEI. And we've already mentioned some of these, access to expertise and adequate resources. As Tonya was saying earlier, you get assigned, congratulations, you are a DEI leader. Now what? The number one issue is while there are experienced professionals out there, many times this DEI role is part-time or is an added task. And often budgets are just not enough. According to Russell Reynolds, 53% of D&I leaders are part-time. And most say that they don't have enough budget authority. The second big challenge is knowing where to focus. This is really a big success factor because, as they say, if you don't measure, you can't improve things, right? So 67% of all organizations say that they don't know what to measure for DEI or lack the relevant benchmarks. Even if they measure something, they don't know where they stand to see, where they should really focus. And then the last, but by no means the least, actually, this is a key issue that even if you get some expertise and if you start to measure, but most organizations, even those that have achieved some diversity, good diversity in their representation, goes back to what Tonya was talking about having really the inclusion piece and the equity piece, because they find that they can't get full alignment and engagement. And as you know, Gartner has been reporting about engagement for many years, many decades actually, and engagement is still at only about 33% and has only improved a few percentage points in the last 20 years. So really, if you want to build an inclusive culture, what is culture? Culture is a set of behaviors, right? And unless you engage broadly, you are not changing culture. Sonya, Tonya, what do you see in terms of challenges from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Sonya. I think, definitely resonating with your big three here. So, for example, under the first one and second, I think you mentioned what to measure. What are our indicators, right? And you said the magic word, culture. How does one quantify culture? So we get that question a lot in terms of what folks are trying to look for. And the second thing in sort of knowing where to focus, I also get several questions around how to be more inclusive with the workforce we have. It's important that we're anticipating the workforce to come and sort of that kind of thing. But before we get our quote unquote diversity numbers, how do we learn to be inclusive with the few and far between that we may already have, or thinking about other layers of diversity? So I would say those are two of the most common issues that I see when we're having these broader conversations. Mm-hmm.
Great. So what do you say? We can now find out more about challenges the audience is experiencing through a poll. So here it comes. What DEI challenges do you face in your organization? Again, here are some choices: knowing what to measure, finding relevant benchmarks, limited resources, budget, experienced staff, time, and so on. Having a clear plan with objectives, knowing what actions to take on a daily basis. Another one is engaging the whole organization, and finding out how employees really feel on an ongoing basis. And then if there's something else, you can also mark that one. So we're going to give it a second here so that you can put in some of what you see in terms of your challenges. We can see that, right away, there's two big ones coming in: limited resources, for sure, and finding relevant benchmarks, finding out how employees really feel on an ongoing basis, and then engaging the whole organization are coming in as the results for that. Well, great. So now we're learning more about you. We really appreciate your participation in this. Remember, we're asking these questions because we're trying to see where we should make any tweaks to the plan and to the process for this fellowship program. So now let's talk about that process and how specifically these challenges that were just described here are actually addressed through the process. So again, remember we talked about an align phase and a connect phase. So we'll talk a little bit about each one. And don't worry, we'll go through each of these points one by one, and then you can ask questions later on too. So starting with align, the objective here is to get alignment across the leadership and through the organization. So one of the first things we know is that, leadership commitment, of course, is very important. What we're talking about here is, leaders often put out statements and say that they're generally interested in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then they need to have some personal engagement, and they need to have, visibly show that and to get the alignment at the next levels. So what we do in this phase to help is first we assign that DEI manager, that expert. And in this case, with the fellowship program, we are going to have a Wayne State University student, or it may be a DEI lead in your company that you would like to use to put into the fellowship program. So both are possible. If you have a DEI lead, they don't have to be full-time. It's someone that you think is going to lead this effort for you. Then you could actually put them into the fellowship program, and they can be leading the effort for your company, of course, which is a win-win, both training them and also getting the benefits for your own organization. If you don't have a D&I lead assigned, or your organization, for whatever reason, is just not in the foreseeable future planning to or able to have a focused leadership role within your organization, that's fine as well. We will have, first of all, the D&I manager who's assigned, who will guide and support you through the process, but also we will have a Wayne State University student assigned as the fellow, really working under the guidance and leadership of the DEI manager. What they will do, the DEI manager and the fellow, is they will then engage in the next 4 bullets that are described here for this align phase. They will have some executive interviews with your leadership team. They will have some listening sessions with the employees. These are all templated. They're designed to make it as easy and as clear for you, so that you can actually do it without having to worry about how do we go about this, how much time do I have to put in. All of that is very well defined. Again, a proven process that we have done with a variety of different types of organizations before. So we go through that process, and then there is 2 assessments. The first one here, the D&I maturity model assessment, is really assessing for your infrastructure, your processes, your policies, your benefits, your strategic efforts around DEI. This is a unique and proprietary assessment that we have. It's been featured, and if you go searching for a D&I maturity model, I think we come up at the top or near the top on the Google searches, because it's really one of a kind, and it's been proven to, again, very quickly give you a a number of scores that give you a sense of where to focus. This again goes back to what Tonya was saying about what do you measure, right? We've figured it out, and with a lot of experts and university effort helping with defining these. And so you get 5 scores, you get the benchmarks for your industry for the 5 scores as well. And so very quickly you know where to focus on from an infrastructure perspective, which is so important for creating that inclusive culture. And then the second assessment is really an employee experience survey. This is somewhat similar to engagement surveys. And if you've just done one, certainly we don't need to do another one right away. But it really is focused more on DEI and the experience from the employee perspective. And so it is also a very good tool. It is one that all your employees will take, and you will get a report on that as well. And then all of these assessments, the listening sessions, the learnings from the executive interviews, all of that goes into a 12-month DEI plan that's delivered. And of course, there's some iterative process to go back and forth and make sure that you make it your own. And that's really sets the stage for everything else that happens. I can't overemphasize how important this step is in terms of getting, that kind of assessment and that kind of understanding of where things are to then proceed to get alignment. So here we're going to pause for a moment and ask you, with the description that you see here, how important does it seem to you from what you know now? You don't have to stress about this, just, what's your gut feeling about how important this step is for your organization? Is it very important? Is it somewhat important? Is it maybe not important in your view, or you just don't know? So take a moment and take a guess at that. Again, we're not, this is just to see where you think you're at. The results that are coming in are very consistent with our experience. This is actually, I dare say, and Tonya, I would love to hear your views on this too, but the results are coming in now. It's looking like 87% say it's very important, 12% say they don't know. What's your experience with how important this kind of a step might be?
Well, I agree. And I think it's actually been reflected in the chat. We've seen some back and forth with the idea that we have a DEI initiative, but it feels like we're unfunded, we're under-resourced because maybe it isn't a strategic priority. Also conversations about what if you are part of the challenges that you're trying to solve. All of that are different ways of saying alignment, right? How do you align this with the strategic and the financial goals, with the executives' sort of top priorities and those kinds of things. So it's very consistent. I mean, the way to be successful and sustainable with any of these initiatives is actually to align it as a through point, as opposed to adding a brand new something else to do inside of the work you're already doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So now that we've talked about align phase, I must say again, it's very consistent with our understanding and really our experience that this step must be done and must be done right. And sometimes people say, well, we've done some planning, we have some roadmap, but you got to go back and look at it and see, did it take into consideration all of these aspects that we think are critically important to get into the plan? And does the plan, your DEI plan, really needs to address 3 key things, just to expand on this a bit more. It needs to address why, what, and how. So the why is, why are we even doing DEI, right? I mean, it's easy to say, oh, we should focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but why is it in terms of how is DEI linked with your business drivers and strategic priorities? When we work with you to develop this DEI plan, that is, I think, the most important thing we ever do in the entire program, I would even say, because once you make that linkage between diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it's closely linked and even perhaps a driver to your success in a strategic priority or a business driver that has already been defined by your organization and your leadership, then it really makes it an important, a visible, and really a sustained kind of effort towards this cultural transformation for your workforce and your workplace. That is what really makes it real for many people, creates the engagement, and then ensures that it's not just a short-term project, but it's really an overall long-standing effort. So now let's go to the next phase after you've had a successful align phase. The next phase of this is connect. This is a critical step right after getting alignment when you approach DEI as a sustainable change initiative towards an inclusive culture. As we said, culture is a set of behaviors. So connecting and engaging the organization is key. And when this step is missed, you often end up with good numbers and lots of initiatives. But we have customers who come to us after a lot of work to say that they hit a plateau. And their workplace, even though they have the numbers, just doesn't feel inclusive, they say. And the first step, again, is to start with the why, is, sharing that critical link that was established in the line phase with everybody, and telling them why you're doing that. So we start in this phase by, of course, you always have the ongoing guidance and support by the DEI manager and the DEI fellow, but we start by launching this, what we call the culture app. This is when you start getting into the technology piece of it. It's also known as the employee portal that the employees can opt into. We train in order to get good engagement, and to do this right, we train and engage early adopters that you identify. This could be your current champions, it could be your allies, it could be if you have a council already, if you have ERGs already, these would be your early adopters. They would get trained and start creating some content, and then they would also give feedback, how they experience it, because every organization is different. What works and what doesn't work is different. And then they start advocating, across the organization. And then at the right time, usually within 2 to 3 weeks into that, then we will guide and again support you in terms of inviting all of your employees to opt in and engage. So it really provides a 24/7 real-time kind of insight that you can have to the voice of the employees. We always say surveys, engagement surveys, and these things are very good and very important. You should, of course, do them, but they only are a snapshot in time. There's no way that you can really know about the voice of your employees and your team unless you have an ongoing 24/7 kind of real-time environment to do that. So here again, we've shared a little bit about what this is, but I would like to now, also hear about what your experiences are and what you hear from your organization in terms of engagement, maybe things that people have talked about. How important do you think this step of connect is in your organization? Is it, again, very important, somewhat important, not important, or you just don't know? And take a moment and put your answers in there as well. I will say that in this platform, just a couple of things to say about it. It's really a safe digital environment, right? It also makes it easy for leaders to engage. So they can engage and share their experiences and have authentic conversations. And we found that when they do this, when leaders do this, there is what we call a CEO effect. And what we mean is the CEO or a top leader, shares a personal experience, or even just, interacts in terms of replies to maybe some posts. And then all of a sudden there's anywhere from a 2x to 10x impact on engagement of the rest of the organization. It's not just a little bit more engagement, it's significantly more engagement. And then what's amazing is that, it really takes a while for that engagement to die down or go back down. And it never goes quite back down to the level it was before that engagement started. Once leaders start engaging in this kind of an environment, which only takes them a few minutes to do, it is so powerful in improving engagement across the board. When we reflect upon, the engagement that's been sitting there kind of stagnant around 33%, this is really a powerful way to improve engagement and start creating a dialogue and a connection with the employees. So I see that the results are coming in. How important is this phase? 75% say very important, and 25% say somewhat important. That's awesome. Thanks again. Tonya, anything you would like to add on this?
So I particularly appreciate this, the idea of, getting feedback and conversation in real time, and want to emphasize something that you said, that part of this is also just the beginning, right? So you can begin surfacing these things with the various tools and platforms that really take a systematic approach, almost a systems engineering approach, to unearthing the conversations that you want your leaders to carry. I think many of us have been in conversations that happens in one section of the building, but not in another section of the building. It's not that folks don't want to talk about DEI, it's that they have certain people that they will talk to DEI about. And it's really hard to leverage those points of information when they're isolated from each other. And so that's part of what the connect actually means, to be able to connect these disparate conversations, disparate point of views to something practical that you can dig into and identify.
Absolutely. And, there's other features we can talk about in more detail another time, but there are features really built into the platform to really nudge people more towards inclusive behaviors. There's some, most importantly, you get some awareness of who's engaging with you, for example, who are the most engaged, how you're engaging. So some of this data, again, data is power, right? So we provide some insights to whoever is engaging, to all the employees. And then beyond that, some more even insights to leadership in terms of what's really happening there. So it is very, very powerful to do that, as you also said. So we're going here towards the kind of the last part of this, which is a case study, sharing a case study. We tell you that it's a proven process, but here is a live example of a specific organization. Happens to be, in this case, was a manufacturing company. Focused on, as you recall from some of the drivers that people link with DEI, on innovation. They knew they needed a more diverse and inclusive organization to be more innovative, but also to brand themselves as being more innovative. Because sometimes there is a reality, maybe you are innovative, but what does your brand say? But they were having some issues like access to expertise, knowing what to measure. They knew they had a tough employee engagement issue. Even with webcasts from the top leaders, they often said they were lucky if they got 15%, 20% engagement. In the connect phase, they saw that their employee engagement increased to right away to like 60, 70% pretty quickly. And very soon they started hearing people throwing around terminology that was new, but was very welcome in their workplace, like talking about empathy. And noticed some curiosity about different cultural celebrations, for example, things that, that they were a mature organization that had been around a long time. And it was just all really eye-opening for them. There's things that for years they had wanted that their organization would do more of. And that's really is the heart of it, Tonya, what you were saying about, there's different people in the building, or now maybe actually in our different homes, some of us. And we want to talk to each other, but how often do we walk over to somebody's office or pick up the phone if we're these days working from home and talking to someone? But this makes it super easy, right? It's a digital environment. We're all used to doing that. So it really helps in that context. And then once you get that, people talking to each other, this elusive empathy, really understanding what someone else's perspective is and how they're feeling, kind of happens naturally. Also, another thing that we saw here in terms of their metrics that you see there, some of the increases here in terms of the outcomes, was that they were very focused on diversity hiring. But it was mostly focused on entry level, which was good. They were going to HBCUs and had, decent representation numbers, both for gender and racial diversity. But they were not measuring any other dimensions, like disabilities, age, veteran status. And with this early assessment phase, they found a few gaps that they weren't focused on before, like a structural diversity issue in management ranks and in millennial hiring, which they were able to improve by focusing on that. And really, a lot of it was more through their internal performance assessment and career advancement processes. And by applying some innovative ways of attracting millennials, like cool ads in different outlets than they had hired from before. So it just opened up a whole set of options for them that they just weren't thinking of before. And that's once they were aware, they didn't need to legislate anything. It just almost happened again naturally. The beauty of it is that, once there's awareness, when there's a better way to understand and get insights, a lot happens somewhat naturally. And they also realized that one thing that was already true, but they didn't realize it before, but they could really use it for their branding efforts. And that was that they had much better veteran representation in their management ranks than their general population. So they were able to actually do some PR around that in their recruitment and branding efforts, which was very helpful and kind of like a bonus that they got as part of that. Mm-hmm. So having shared some of these case studies, of course, case studies are different from organization to organization, and you probably have your own challenges. But what we like to ask in this poll, which is our last one, I promise.
Hey, Sonya, before you surprise us with the last poll, I've been reading a couple of the questions that Anushka has pointed out for us, and they actually go really well with the slide. So how about we take a quick pause and we answer some of those. So one of the questions I think goes directly to this slide, which was around how do I get my role, and I'm assuming that the role is of a diversity manager, to be more central and strategic, a more strategic fabric, more part of the strategic fabric of the company, right? How do I sort of raise the level of this issue? And so I'll give it a start. And it's right there, right? The outcomes in the case study are business metrics, right? And it's very interesting. None of them specifically says diversity or inclusion, but these are about talent, retention, bottom line performance, and that kind of thing. And so I think that this is one of the strategies and one of the things that you'd be able to measure and be able to report out and return if you had a really solid platform that could give you that information very, very easily. Sonya, you've obviously seen this happen in real time many times. Do you have something to add to that?
Absolutely. This is, I think what you said is exactly right. And it's a great response. We see this often where especially if a new DEI manager is assigned, and sometimes it's one who's been in that role for a while, but really has, after the initial excitement, we have a DEI manager, they're kind of like plateauing and not sure how to get the attention of the key leaders. Sometimes they have full support from the CEO and certainly from the HR organization, but other key leaders in the business. So what has really helped them is once this DEI plan is signed by the top leader, because that's what we say is that what we recommend highly, of course, is always up to the company at the end, but we highly recommend, these are the kind of guidance that we provide. At the end of the day, we can give you the best practice, but you make a decision about it. And the high recommendation here in terms of the DEI plan is it makes it real. It makes it so much more powerful if the top leader, the CEO, for example, signs it. And once that happens, I've had DEI manager tell me that she walked in with the DEI plan, under her arm, and she walked into a key leader's office and started talking about, I wanted to just make you aware of this new plan that has been put out, and these are, that describes, how DEI is linked with the key business strategies and priorities. And then very quickly, she told us that the whole conversation, the whole posture, and the whole way that the key leader viewed this effort was so different from how it had been before. And along with that, because all of us are working towards the impact. At the end of the day, it's how do you weave it into the fabric of the organization? How do you make the D&I role be a more impactful? How do you get it, a seat at the table, so to speak, the D&I leader who is given so much responsibility, typically just one person, if that, maybe a part-time role. How do you make that happen? And so having that DI plan at the very beginning, and then of course linking it with all of the performance indicators, the KPIs and metrics is really the answer.
And I think this is important as we think about going forward. I want to candidly acknowledge that we're having a moment where it's easier to talk about DEI issues in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But once that moment passes, it will need to be, as we said, aligned with the language that your company already values, right? So there's an opportunity to use this moment in that space, though we may be under-resourced, understaffed, but to make some progress and to get ways of talking about the metrics and the outcomes that will sustain into the future. And to that end, we had another question. Tips for DEI implementers that face the same issues they are trying to solve, such as a lack of equity or inclusivity for themselves. And I think that gets right up there at, sort of outcome 4X. I think one of the things that I talk about in this work, the idea that we should bring our whole selves to work is nonsense. Everyone wants to be able to tell their significant other they know a special part of you. So clearly you're always going to hold back 2%. At least. But I think what we need to reflect on, I heard someone phrase it this way, is that certain communities have to leave a disproportionate amount of themselves at the door. And those communities that are disproportionately leaving parts of self at the door are the ones that have the lack of engagement, the lack of retention, and they are harder to recruit. This does go down to a business decision. I was talking with a colleague of mine recently, won't mention the colleague or the company, and we were considering an opportunity that was going to come in front of him. And he flat out said, no, I'm not going to work in that environment. This was not a young up-and-comer. This was a seasoned, highly sought-after professional that had learned enough about the culture of the company that he might be stepping into that he said, no, that's not where I want to be. And so I think thinking through those kinds of conversations, and then from a day to day, I would say part of what actually keeps me going is a passion for the work, right? And so I make sure to celebrate the micro moments. I think in terms of that.
That is so awesome. That's a great question and a great response. Thank you, Tonya. I will say that from my own career also. I mean, some of the reason why I got into this, just to share maybe 30 seconds about it, is, I'm an engineer by training. I was, NASA the first decade of my career, and then in aerospace and defense. And in one of my last big corporate roles, when I got there, in terms of talking about being the person yourself, right? I was brought in as a leader, mostly for a business challenge of doing things really much more with much more agility and urgency, connected with delivering some products into very serious war theaters, and how do we do that better because of the cost in terms of human life that was as we know, we're a nation that's been at war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so it was a very serious situation. But I was the first person of any diversity in ever in the 50-year history of this great organization, multi-billion-dollar organization. And I came in there to do a job. We did the job well. We decided to focus on DEI. But meanwhile, there was a lot of attention on me and how come, this is the first woman and person of any diversity to lead this type of an organization in this and in this part of the country, frankly, that I was. So I was the subject of it myself. That's an interesting, really, perspective to have on things. But I think it makes it also real, and it made it real for me because once we put our minds to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion broadly, 6.5, 7 years later, I saw some of the BCG data that I shared is exactly my experiences of everything we did. We were lucky if about a quarter of it was really sustainable change and was really effective. And that was, again, because we didn't have a lot of what we're talking about today. So with that, shall we put up that last poll, do you think?
Sure, let's put it up. And as a reminder, we'd like for people to be honest but kind. In terms of that. So our last poll question is, just given, what you've heard, if you had soul power, how about that? How likely would your organization be to take advantage of a program like this, in terms of the way we've talked about structuring it and the outcomes we'd like to see for your company?
Okay, well, we're getting good results. 75% say they would. They're highly likely, and there's some honest people. 20. Well, actually, that jumped to 80%. Now there is some, or 85% actually, and 14% don't know. That's honest answer. Awesome. Well, I do want to go. What do you say, Tonya? I go to the next slide here and make sure that we talk about the next steps and what people should be aware of. Would you like to summarize here?
Sure. So the answer to the obvious question, yes, the slides in this webinar will be available, to share. For more information, if you had a question, I think we got them all, but if another question comes up, please email us at DEI-fellowships@OurOffice.io. Yes, you may share the program with other folks and colleagues, particularly those of you who are in larger companies and you recognize the different divisions or different departments, you have a counterpart. We'd be more than excited to talk to multiple departments within larger organizations. And also, we're going to respect your privacy and reaching out. So please, I know some of you had direct invitations from various colleagues, but do make sure that you've submitted your name and contact information at that website down there at the bottom. And we'll put it in the chat as well. This will let us know that you'd like to hear more information and that you would like to be kept up to date as we begin to specifically put additional calls out for definitive participation in the program.
Yeah, you see a couple of links here. Please do use those links, and we just can't wait to see you all and have more conversation with you as we talk about your specific situations. Please don't hesitate to ask specific questions about your situation. There is, this is not a cookie cutter kind of a program. I just put in the chat this email address, DEI Fellowship, with a hyphen between DEI and fellowship at OurOffice.io. And then also this, we'll also add this page that you can, after this event, you can still indicate interest in the program.
And one thing I'll add, Anushka encouraged us to try to get in one more. And the question was, if someone in the organization is going to participate, what is the time commitment? Well, good news is if you're already a diversity manager or sort of in that role, this is not additional time. This is a better use of the time that you're already putting in there. Because the idea is that we would sort of use this program and the platform inside your organization and your division for initiatives that you're trying to push forward now. And of course, if you are bringing someone in from the outside, be it one of the practiced DEI managers from our office combined with one of our associates from Wayne State University, that will also fit very well into their time. I will resist counting the number of hours because I do not want to encourage this part-time DEI manager thing. Okay, but I would just say that if you're in that space and in that practice, the idea is that this actually becomes part of the work that you are doing with your company, and we'd be very interested. We'll be asking follow-up questions about your willingness and interest to participate in things like thought leader circles, communities of other DEI managers as they sort of share through and work through some of the issues that you may also have in common.
Yeah, and much more details will be available, especially in the discovery session that will follow. I will say, as much as I'm with you in this is part of the regular job and not to count hours, I will say that it's entirely possible and in fact intended to be for part-time participation. That's where our DEI manager and the tools and the technology and all that comes in, because we recognize that's the reality at many companies. With that, we are exactly at the top of the hour. We do like to end the time. Tonya, it's been a joy as always talking.
It's been wonderful, Sonya.
I hope that we have provided good, useful information. Please write us. Please tell us what we can do better and how we can help you specifically, and we will definitely be in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.